Once again, hello to all the Wilson Center watchers. We're now 2 weeks after Operation Absolute Resolve, and I've loved the opportunity to share my thoughts on how the U.S. can ensure Venezuela remains stable by empowering democratic actors in the country. So now we're beginning to perhaps see an opening as President Trump met this week with opposition leader María Machado for a private lunch at the White House, followed by a bipartisan meeting with members of Congress. While much of the conversation remains private, I suspect President Trump, who tends to be drawn to these strong, tough figures, would be impressed by her resilience and capabilities. Remember, they've not had much of a chance to get to know each other, given she was in clandestinity for over a year. So this was the very first face-to-face meeting they've had the opportunity to share. It can be really hard to assess how it went without getting a readout, but sometimes we can tell by the nature of the meeting. So, for example, some speculated that the fact that there wasn't press signifies a lack of prioritization, and certainly sometimes that can be the intent. But in this particular instance, we're talking about a significant joint interest in the outcome of Venezuela, and having a closed-door meeting only with significant figures like the president and a few senior officials could have provided them with the necessary opportunity to dive into next steps without appearing too buddy-buddy for the regime officials that the administration is still collaborating with on security. So this is really a delicate line. President Trump did note that at some point in the future, he plans to meet remaining Maduro regime official Delcy Rodriguez, but he didn't specify when. Now, at the same time, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt directly addressed President Trump's interest in democracy in Venezuela, noting that he hopes there will be elections at some point in the future. This is supported by polling both of Trump voters and of Venezuelans. So I run the Vandenberg Coalition, and we recently conducted a poll that showed 70% of Trump voters believe the U.S. should work with democratic actors in restoring democracy to Venezuela. And a recent poll from The Economist inside Venezuela suggests that over 65% of Venezuelans want to see new elections. Notably, there's only 3 people inside Venezuela, according to this same Economist poll, that have over 50% favorability. That's Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, and María Machado. Now, if this talk on democracy continues and there's more specificity on timelines and what this means, we could begin to see important changes and pressure on the remaining members of the Maduro regime. So I thought now would be a good time to talk about what that could actually look like. So we've been saying there's a need to return to democracy, and María Corina has spoken about her interest in and willingness to participate in new elections. But what would that include? What would it look like if the administration were pushing for free and fair elections? What are the triggers that we're looking at? Well, we've spoken already about prisoner releases and insisting on the unconditional release and pardoning of all political prisoners. This has been moving really slowly, and indications suggest those released remain charged and barred from any kind of public appearances or disclosures. So we've seen this many times in the past with this regime. But if we were to see more pressure, in addition to the release of political prisoners, we would be looking at things like the granting of amnesty for political exiles, including President-elect Edmundo Gonzalez, who's been living in Spain because of the security threats against him in Venezuela, and of course, María Corina herself. One thing we can look to for guidance on how the administration might go about pushing a return to democracy is what we call the Framework for Democratic Transition. This document is publicly available, and it was the first Trump administration's effort to really push for free and fair elections. And while it lays out a few things that are no longer tenable, given the differences between Venezuela 2019 and Venezuela 2026, it does include a menu of items for things that would need to change to empower free elections. Things like replacing the current rectors in the Electoral Council, for example, and replacing the justices on the Supreme Court, who at this stage are all hand-picked Maduro loyalists. It would mean removing bans on electoral participation, bans on media engagement, and perhaps adopting a Truth and Reconciliation Committee. Voting machines would need to be investigated and updated. Legislative elections, of course, would have to precede presidential ones because of their need to certify the presidential election. So these are the types of things that I'll be keeping an eye on for the coming days and weeks. Now, this is not going to be a quick process. Some of these steps alone will take many months. But based on if we start seeing this language and these policies, and based on how President Trump messages his meeting with María Corina, we may have some insights as to how the administration plans to turn the tactical success of absolute resolve into strategic success for itself and Venezuela.